Like many people of my generation, I distinctly remember hearing one name spoken on the TV and by people in everyday life over and over again.
Buffy.
Buffy. Buffy. Buffy. Buffy.
I heard it said so many times that when I was introduced to Sarah Michelle Gellar via the 2002 Scooby-Doo movie and Mama Calloway referred to her as Buffy, I was surprised to watch the end credits and discover that her real name was in fact not Buffy. Such was the ubiquity of the show and character that I did not watch a single episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer until a decade after it first started airing. But even before then, you didn't even have to say the remaining 3 words in the title, and I knew what you were talking about. And once the show became part of my life, I had to read everything and anything about it. And I'm still discovering just what an impact it had on not just pop culture, but also media and storytelling today. And at some point, I came across the title in a book it shouldn't have been in. For those who remember Halliwell's Guide to Film, I saw Buffy the Vampire Slayer listed, but Buffy was a TV show, so there was a movie? Eventually, to condense years worth of needless time reading nonsense on the internet, I learned all about the narrative. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was initially a 1992 feature film using the same concept as the series, but featuring none of the cast, except a pre-fame Seth Green in a bit part. But it was terrible because the whole thing was ripped out of Lord and Saviour Joss Whedon's hands, and the finished thing had so little to do with what he wrote that he disowned it. And so everyone else had to as well, and focus on the rebooted TV show that was way better. So how dare anyone even think of watching that piece of garbage and not condemning it on every possible level?
I don't think there's anything more for us to say.
I'm now remembering a comment that said, "Is it just me or is he getting snarkier these days?" And people, that savagery was always in me ever since the age of 10 when my mother scolded me for eating a piece of food off the floor saying it hadn't been cleaned in ages, and my response was, "And whose fault is that?" So back to seriousness. Joss Whedon does not have kind things to say about the 1992 movie that attempted to bring Buffy Summers into the world. Sort of like how 90% of the actors who worked on his shows and movies have few kind things to say about him now. And that's me being kind because it's more like 95%. So before his professional assholeness was public knowledge, people would frequently compare the movie to the show to indicate how it failed where the show succeeded. And yeah, 7 seasons, enduring popularity and responsibility for creating TV tropes is definitely a success in my book. But financial failure or disappointment at the box office of course does not equal artistic failure, since some people would be surprised to learn that a beloved film like The Shawshank Redemption was initially seen as a flop when it was first released, only later gathering its sacred cow status once people started renting it on video or watching it on TV. And funnily enough, that same thing happened to the Buffy movie.
It could happen.
It turned a small profit, grossing $16 million on only a $7 million budget, but it ended up amassing a small cult fan base from people seeing it rerun on TV or renting it on VHS. In fact, Sand Dollar Television was the company that owned the rights to show it on the small screen, and their president Gail Berman loved the script so much that she approached Joss Whedon about redoing it as a series, and it was arguably her tenacity and determination after multiple rejections that got it greenlit at all. But with the movie being panned by critics and not having the explosive popularity of the series, few are in a rush to defend it. And I didn't even see it until last October, and comparing the movie to the series is very much an apples and oranges situation, with both using the same concept in very differing ways.
Besides, I look cute in a tiara.
In both versions, Buffy Summers is a ditzy cheerleader who discovers that she's what's called a Slayer, a supernaturally empowered girl who is destined to kill vampires. In the series, this power was distributed among several teenage girls throughout history called Potentials, and one of them would become a new Slayer when the current one is killed in action. She also seems to be expected to deal with any kind of supernatural threat. In the film, Buffy is a reincarnation of several Slayers throughout history, and her powers awaken when a particularly powerful vampire is due to come out of hibernation, and her foes are restricted to just the vamps as far as we know.
Time to stop the killing. To stop the vampires.
The series begins as something mostly light-hearted, but still on the serious side, with plenty of bathos to add some levity, and this would be known as Joss Whedon's signature style throughout his other works, with Buffy's style of playing around with the English language being named Buffy speak. And it was not without its criticisms, especially with the man's frequent habit of sacrificing character voice for the sake of a joke. Most notably Thor, who had spent his own movie being directed by the much more competent Kenneth Branagh, who viewed Loki as a brother regardless of blood relation, making this joke.
He killed 80 people in 2 days.
He's adopted.
The movie Buffy the Vampire Slayer is much more comedic, and more in line with 80s horror comedies, though still containing some serious moments.
You've been hurt.
Oh no, you know what they say, anyone you can walk away from is good.
Its approach to the subject matter was different, not better or worse. And general consensus is that the high school years of the TV show are the best, although the polarizing 6th season is actually my second favourite after the 3rd. Good luck keeping sense of those numbers. But while there are many parts of the series that have not aged well, the movie is actually looking kind of great.
Admit it, Buffy. Aren't there times when you just feel less than fresh?
As an aside, would you all believe that my favourite Batman movie is actually Batman Forever? And I credit High Top Films for making me finally appreciate the sheer artistry that went into both creating the high camp and giving it genuine substance. And it's a good comparison point to the Buffy movie. Joel Schumacher's vision for Batman Forever was to present it as a pop culture opera in the zone of heightened reality. And that's Buffy the movie as well. Both horror and teen comedy have to take place in our reality to be mainstream, or at least they did in 1992, but the realm of horror comedy allows for a distorted reality where the macabre meets the hilarious. Like the iconic An American Werewolf in London, where a man who's become a werewolf is being given cheerful suggestions on how to kill himself by the ghosts of his victims who can't go into the light until there's an end to the full moon shenanigans.
A gun! I know where you can get a gun.
Don't I need a silver bullet or something?
Oh, be serious, would you?
Buffy the Vampire Slayer the movie takes 3 types of stories out of their familiar settings and smushes them into an entirely new world. The slasher movie is taken out of the suburbs, summer camps, and other remote areas of terror, and the teen comedy is taken out of the confines of high school and wild house parties. And of course, the vampire movie is taken out of gothic castles and elegant mansions, with the opening literally beginning with a sepia flashback to the Dark Ages, where the Slayer holds her stake in the air, and it match cuts to a pom-pom as we witness an enthusiastic cheerleading routine amid pink title credits to an upbeat hip-hop song that is the absolute perfect way to open this movie. The song is called Keep It Coming, and that is exactly what the movie does, transporting us into a vibrant neon playground where Los Angeles is bathed in sun and bright colours for the perfect timestamp of the 80s transitioning to the 90s. It is bold, it is vibrant, and it is absolutely surreal.
Rubies will drip from your lips.
The vibe of the Buffy movie reminds me a lot of more beloved comedies like Heathers and Jawbreaker, where the world of the former was envisioned to be that of a teen movie if it was directed by Stanley Kubrick.
Dear Diary, my teen angst bullshit has a body count.
And the world of the latter being described as a candy-coated nightmare.
Life's a bitch, then you die.
No, honey, you're the bitch.
Oh, so aggressive, Julie.
All 3 movies present dark topics in a reality so distorted it's almost dreamlike, and therefore we accept everything that happens.
School's canceled today because Kurt and Ram killed themselves in a repressed homosexual suicide pact.
No way!
Buffy pulls the teen comedy into a world where being ousted from your clique is because you developed superpowers and had to run out of a cheerleading routine because you have to go kill the basketball player who turned into a vampire, and where the climactic high school dance is also the stage for the final battle. It also pulls the vampire movie into a world where the vamps float in mid-air, losing an arm is a mild inconvenience, and everyone is flamboyant without once winking to the audience. I absolutely love the way this movie is shot and presented, and the surreal world it takes place in. But you may have noticed I didn't talk about how it played with the slasher movie, so... Starting with Halloween, which was the true codifier of the formula, you could expect a sole survivor up against a serial killer, and this would almost always be a female who was brunette, smarter, less promiscuous, and more responsible than some of her rebellious friends. The final girl wasn't always brunette, since Alice Hardy of Friday the 13th was a blonde, and the victims weren't always less responsible, since Tina Weiss of Nightmare on Elm Street was a perfectly nice person, but horror was usually rooted in morality play. The babysitters who shirk their responsibilities are killed, while the responsible one who does whatever she can to protect the children survives. And even when we've had 3 decades of playing around with the final girl trope, for your horror movie to work, you can't stray too far from it. Since even Scream, the franchise that's known for being satirical and subversive, still has a very typical final girl in Sidney Prescott. She is a great character, and Neve Campbell is iconic in the role, but how different is she from Laurie Strode or Nancy Thompson?
Well, I have no idea.
And I'm not saying this to criticize the writing of Scream, or indeed praise the writing of Buffy, just to highlight that to make a compelling horror film, you can't deviate too much from what makes the good ones work, since the majority of your attention hinges on wanting this character to survive. But in the realm of parody, where the comedy allows for a significantly distorted reality, then you have more freedom to go completely against what your audience would expect.
Totally.
Going back to Halloween, there's the supporting character Linda, a ditzy cheerleader who's a bit nicer than the rude Annie, but still a disrespectful flake who gets killed by Michael Myers because of her transgressions. The concept that Buffy started with is that this kind of character was the only one with the powers to stop the monster.
I'm the chosen one and there are vampires?
Buffy in this universe isn't a bad person, but she is shallow and materialistic. With her initial objection to being the Slayer not fear for her life or that she won't be able to protect innocent people, but that it'll ruin her life plan to
Graduate from high school, go to Europe, marry Christian Slater, and die.
I did not marry Christian Slater, but he did come to the premiere of the movie, and he saw me say that in the movie. And he liked it so much that he actually sent me flowers the next day.
And of course, through training and embracing her calling, she matures and realizes there's more to life than shopping and popularity. And since this is in the realm of comedy and parody, it shares something in common with Legally Blonde, which is rightfully celebrated as a parable on the importance of soft power. Elle Woods thinks she has to become a black-wearing, serious law student to succeed, but the universe practically conspires to give her a legal case that can only be won thanks to her knowledge of feminine things.
The rules of hair care are simple and finite. Any Cosmo girl would have known.
Buffy's hero's journey likewise involves her girly attributes becoming transferable skills to help her fight the vampires. She's a cheerleader and former gymnast, which allows her to be athletic enough to fight monsters and do lots of flips, handsprings and cartwheels to keep said fighting looking pretty and girly, as opposed to more masculine brawling. She's also able to use hairspray to fight Lothos, keeps stakes in her purse, and saves the day while wearing a frilly evening gown. They even set up this exchange between Buffy and Pike,
You're not like other girls.
with Buffy happily affirming that she is like other girls.
Yes, I am.
In this incarnation, she also gets menstrual cramps to signal that vampires are nearby. If menstruation ever shows up in horror, it's usually to enhance it, such as Carrie White having a traumatic first period that releases her psychic powers, and Ginger Snaps paralleling it to lycanthropy. This version of Buffy, however, takes something that is typically used in the horror genre to make male viewers uncomfortable, or remind female viewers of the awkwardness that comes with growing up, and presents it as something that is key in fighting the monsters. And it actually makes sense for this to be tied to vampires, who are all about bloodsucking.
My secret weapon is PMS.
It's interesting that the movie has these touches that the series doesn't, and it was directed by a woman, who also cited her inspiration as Sailor Moon was of course a pioneering manga and anime that also proved to be very subversive with the magical girl genre, which beforehand tended to be about supernaturally powered young women using their powers in a manner more like Samantha Stevens from Bewitched. And Sailor Moon instead had an epic interdimensional conflict that spanned centuries, and the only one who could save the day was a ditzy flake called Usagi, or Serena if you were introduced via the first English dub.
Serena, please, you're a girl, not a hyena.
And while Usagi/Serena does mature over the course of the story, she never trades in her femininity to do so. None of the girls in her ensemble do. And while this is more about Japanese values, it was still a revelation in the West, and that's one of the reasons the franchise endures in popularity today.
But you have to check this out, it's so funny!
The superpowers in both Sailor Moon and Buffy the movie are not associated with demonizing the feminine.
I have something that the other girls didn't have.
And what might that be, pray?
My keen fashion sense.
Buffy of the movie has a lot more in common with Cordelia Chase of the series, who is put in contrast to our more down-to-earth protagonists. But of course the idea there is that we're meeting Buffy after she's been the Slayer for a while and matured, since we see a flashback to her being awakened where she is indeed more like the movie's Buffy.
You're not from Bullock's, are you? Because I meant to pay for that lipstick.
And the choice to cast Sarah Michelle Gellar reflects that, since although Hollywood tried to present her as an action star, her strength was always in these hyper-feminine archetypes. As one of her most beloved performances is Helen Shivers in I Know What You Did Last Summer, playing the very character Buffy was a subversion of.
What happened between us?
In both the movie and the series, Buffy's two lifestyles come into conflict. The pressure to be a normal teenager, and to be a super serious Slayer.
This is all I do. This is what my life is.
Series Buffy eventually embraces her destiny and becomes more Slayer than normal girl. Movie Buffy says, why not both? And again, that's not to say movie Buffy good and series Buffy bad, or vice versa. Both are just different interpretations of the same concept. And I like Kristy Swanson's work.
We're joined? Please.
My only exposure to her before this was seeing The Phantom as a kid and her, choices in Flowers in the Attic.
Eat the cookie!
But she feels very natural in this.
Merrick, you made a joke. That's good. Are you alright? Do you want to lie down? I know it hurts for the first time.
She definitely understood the material and when to play up the vapid airhead side to the character, but also when to take it serious and when to just have fun.
Does the word duh mean anything to you?
There's a subsection of fans who actually prefer her in the role to Sarah Michelle Gellar, and I get it. She solidifies herself as a great Buffy in my book when she has this immortal exchange with the henchman Amelin, who lost an arm the first time they fought.
We're immortal, Buffy. You can do anything.
Oh yeah? Clap!
And this movie has a very fun collection of supporting characters, with the late Donald Sutherland being absolutely fantastic as Buffy's original watcher Merrick.
Rather fond of passing out, just as I happened by.
He has had to deal with a rather undeserved bad rep after Joss Whedon rose to prominence and would not shut up about how much of a prick he was on set, committing the cardinal sin of improvising and ad-libbing despite getting permission from the lady directing the movie. Heaven forbid a veteran actor wants to contribute ideas that the director is on board with, and that a woman director overrules the writer. And a touch that I quite like with Merrick is one that was slightly muted with Giles in the series. Show Buffy has an absent father, but a loving and down-to-earth mother, and she herself is already quite mature and grounded. So Giles is there as a guiding hand to supply exposition and be an obstacle for Buffy to sneak around so she can do normal teenage girl stuff. In the movie, Buffy has both parents, and both of them are yuppies who are completely uninvolved in their daughter's life.
She thinks my name is Bobby.
It's possible she thinks my name's Bobby.
And so Merrick becomes that surrogate parent that helps Buffy realize her calling. And he has a little arc of his own, beginning as an uptight authority figure who does things like sneaking into a girl's locker room to challenge Buffy on her destiny, and with active contempt for her safety, and how he tricks her into going into a graveyard where he knows a vampire will attack, throwing a knife at her, taking it on faith that she'll stop it, and pretty much telling her how little he thinks of her.
Quite probably the most vacuous choice in my entire...
Okay, I think we both get the point.
But he comes to see the person behind the Slayer, in essence representing us, the typical horror audience, coming to see the humanity in the character usually presented as disposable, and where the feminine is often demonized or treated as unworthy of survival. And so, he sacrifices himself to prevent Lothos from killing her, and with his dying breath, he tells Buffy to...
do it wrong. Don't play our game.
Just because this movie is camp, it doesn't mean it isn't smart. Buffy also has a love interest played by the late Luke Perry, and there's something of a love triangle that we saw a lot of in the 80s and 90s involving a class contrast, with Pike being the working class foil for Buffy's preppy boyfriend Jeffrey. And since Pike learns very early on that Buffy is a Slayer, they both represent the conflict of her two identities. And Pike's function is also to allow Buffy to realize that becoming a Slayer isn't about giving up things she likes, but rather getting something better. And while Pike initially tries to shame Buffy for wanting to go to her dance, he still shows up for it, both prepared for a potential vampire attack, and to give her a partner after she's been shunned by her former friends and Jeffrey dumped her over the phone, which was considered a dick move to you younger folks who didn't experience life before texting.
You broke up with my machine?
So Pike meets her halfway. He allows for Buffy to both be the Slayer and the teenage girl. And honestly, when I was rewatching this scene for research, I found it very unashamedly sweet.
Glad you came.
And Luke Perry is quite good in that role. Not to mention that Pike might just be the healthiest out of all Buffy's love interests across the movie and the series.
Hey, I can keep talking until you strike me dead or not. I prefer not.
The supporting cast is also absolutely stacked, with David Arquette being a riot as Pike's friend Benny, who gets turned into a vampire and camps it up to demonstrate how he understood the assignment.
Master wants her. And Uncle Sam wants you!
Stephen Root is a real scene stealer as the out-of-touch principal who tries to be hip while lecturing Buffy, and gives out detention slips to the now slain vampire students.
Detention. Detention, detention.
Mark DiCarlo is a delight as this coach who overuses therapy speak.
You missed practice again today. I think you better sit down and think about how that made me feel.
And Paris Vaughn manages to be the rare thing known as a non-white main character in the Buffyverse, who also dies because you can't subvert every stereotype. Although that was actually more of an action movie cliche than horror. You also have none other than a pre-fame Hilary Swank nailing the vapidity to play an easily hateable mean girl.
I already invited them. They're seniors!
And Ben Affleck is a featured extra. The amount of Oscar winners in this cast is staggering. And Paul Rubens. Paul Rubens.
Hi. How's it going?
I think we're all in agreement that he basically walks away with the movie.
Kill him a lot.
He even based the character's look on his own mugshot from 1991, which he described as the coolest I've ever looked. This magnificent death scene was also improvised.
Ooh.
Although, funnily enough, Amelin was originally written to be a woman, and they didn't remove the undertones of romantic devotion when they changed it to a man, so is that good queer rep for 1992? Does being the most entertaining character in the movie count for anything?
You're gonna wish you died.
Overall, this movie understands that a good comedy needs to be almost Shakespearean in terms of memorable minor and supporting characters. It's kind of like A Midsummer Night's Dream in that respect.
I can't believe these people. We paid good money to see this.
We also have Rutger Hauer as the main vampire Lothos, which is fun for fans of Interview with the Vampire, as Anne Rice wanted him to play you-know-who, so this is potentially what that might have looked like.
This is your defense. Please.
Of course, up against more memorable big bads in the series who had entire seasons to build their characters, he can't hope to compete with villains like the Master, Drusilla, Dark Willow, and yep, the first, I like that villain, but he has a memorable costume and gimmick of playing the violin and first trying to seduce the Slayers before he kills them.
It's time to put away childish things.
There's also this comment indicating what kind of effect he had on the audience. The earlier drafts had him dying when Buffy burns the gymnasium down, which is referenced in the series.
I mean, that gym was full of vampire... asbestos.
But that was changed either to make the movie lighter or because of the budget. That honestly would have been a better climax, but what are you gonna do?
Now, I'm really pissed off.
So, as said multiple times, although the movie wasn't the biggest hit, it did become an underground favourite, and it can't be understated that the cult popularity of the movie is what led to the series, since a lot of fans watched the show because they were introduced to Buffy through the movie.
I'm fine, but you're obviously having a bad hair day.
Funny.
And once Joss Whedon got enough clout, he disowned the movie completely, declaring it non-canon, and even flashbacks to Buffy's awakening in season 2 completely differ from the movie. And he later released a comic prequel based on the original script, and thus convicting the movie in the court of public opinion.
Listen, I think there's been a big mistake, alright?
I'm not going to claim that the movie is a misunderstood masterpiece, but it is much better than it's given credit for.
Now, I'm a god.
And now, you're a coat rack.
I feel as though, as a society, we've spent so long dismissing camp and even more comedic works as a whole, that we've overlooked that there is a specific type of artistry that goes into creating something with this heightened tone and reality. Batman Forever is no less masterful than The Dark Knight simply because the latter is more realistic. A movie taking place in a distorted reality can still make you feel real things. Heathers can make you laugh your socks off with its genuinely biting humour.
I got paid in puke. Lick it up, baby. Lick it up.
And feel for its characters when the movie wants you to.
If you were happy every day of your life, you wouldn't be a human being, you'd be a game show host.
Jawbreaker is an anti-message movie designed to be nihilistic, but there's no denying that this hallway scene is epic, and Courtney's downfall is one of the most satisfying villain comeuppances I've ever seen.
Eat shit.
And while I don't think the Buffy movie reaches the heights of something like Heathers, I was still pulled into its world immediately and felt real things, with the jokes all landing and the emotion in this scene getting me. And it's kind of ironic that part of the blame for how the movie industry has gone can be laid at the feet of the man who wrote this. That style of trying to have it both ways and throwing jokes and lampshade hanging as a shield rather than committing to one tone or the other, and sacrificing character voice for levity, well, it turned into the equivalent of a rapidly spreading cloud of poisonous gas that contaminated nearly everything, with the result that this little movie from 1992 feels even newer and fresher than ever. And for added irony, Joss Whedon walked off the set when it became clear he wasn't going to get his way. And while the series was extremely formative for me, I haven't been able to enjoy it the way I used to in years. And I go back and forth on whether it even holds up at all, and it's hard to tell if that's just bias towards Joss Whedon's very public fall from grace. So maybe when I checked the movie out, there was just some energy that needed to go somewhere. But I think it just boils down to it being a fun little story that's a lot cleverer than it was ever given credit for. Because that cleverness came from the minds of people besides the guy who declared it bad actually because he couldn't get his own way. And even after this vindication, those who prefer the series still can't deny that its staying power owes something to the movie that came first.
I'm saving your butt. Well, there was sort of an exchange of butts.
Or to be extremely lowbrow, it only stayed because this Buffy slayed.